Chapter 29. Story of My Life. Dylan was at a loss when Sky turned her teary green eyes to him for help. There was nothing he could do to save her family. Dylan watched her as she stood there hugging herself, so alone and scared. He wanted to help her. She was in such misery, but he didn't know where to start. He wasn't used to much physical contact. Well, the good kind anyways, he thought. Never sure when to give it or what to do. But I reckon a crying woman would want a hug. Dylan took a slight, hesitant step toward her, then froze. What if this was the wrong thing? Story of my life, just can't be normal. But a part of him wanted to take the chance. Hardly aware of what he was doing, he beckoned her to him with a small gesture of his fingers. Come here. Sky stumbled into him. Dylan surprised himself when he instinctively and gently folded his arms around her. Now he was standing there holding her. It felt awkward to him, but she seemed okay with it, so he reckoned he must be doing it right. Sky's sniffles turned to sobs. Her hands clenched at his t-shirt on either side of his body. Dylan squinted down at the top of her bent head as he stiffly held her. She is as different from me as can be, but she's a good woman. I can tell. She cares about that kid, and he ain't anybody to her, just a patient, and she probably has a lot of them. Even with all the craziness around them, she did fun things for the boy. She'd packed one of his favorite books, and they read it together this morning. And there had been a discussion about getting some game called Jenga that Jesse liked to play. He smiled as he remembered Jesse and Sky playing ball in the front yard. Sky couldn't catch worth anything, but he was impressed she kept trying. Everyone laughed at her bad attempts, but she didn't care. She laughed right along with everybody else. Ended up making me and Wade take a few tosses too. Couldn't tell her no. It felt normal. If he even knew what normal was. And there it was, just like that. Dylan's deepest secret. The one he would rarely admit to himself. That he pushed deep down and tried to ignore. His body gave a small involuntary tremor as he struggled to stomp it down again. But it didn't work. His arms tightened around Sky as if he now needed the support. It wasn't the white picket fence, and the perfectly mowed lawn, Dylan was after. It was something deeper than that. He yearned for a family to love and care for. One that would love and care back. A family without the beating, screaming, and hate. Being good, not ugly to one another, or as good as people could be to each other. Some days, the good ones, Dylan thought, for all the wrong he had gone through, he was due some right, so surely it would happen. But most times, he was convinced he would never have what he wanted, ever be worthy of it. Normal often seemed beyond his recognition, something Dylan only guessed at. More than once he'd thought he needed to stop because to imagine something he could never have was too much to bear. But then, her. She's normal. She could help us get rid of the past and move on. That's her job, isn't it? That's what she wants to help the boy do. Why wouldn't it work for me and Wade? The smallest sliver of hope took up residence in Dylan. He was sure he would regret it but couldn't root it out now if he tried. As Sky settled, Dylan's thoughts switched to her pain. Here I am thinking about getting a family when she's worried she's losing hers. Sky stirred in Dylan's firm arms, sinking further into their warmth, letting him give her support both physically and emotionally. Dylan had whispered no comforting reassurances like so many others would have. He knew, as did she, that there was no comfort to give. If someone in that house was sick, their chances were slim. The situation was dire. Once again, Sky broke down, but it was short-lived. When she was done, she raised her head from his chest and saw the tear stains she'd left on his shirt. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said. She ran a hand over the blotches. Realizing she accomplished nothing, she stopped. Dylan gathered a few words to say, hoping they would help. "Sky." His gentle tone surprised her, and she quickly tipped her head up to him. Dylan held her arms as he spoke. "I can't tell you everything is gonna be fine because we can't know that. I don't know if it's gonna be okay for them, or us, and I'm not one to pretend it will be. But for what it's worth, I'm here. And we are gonna get through today and tomorrow and every day after that, just as good as we can. That much I can promise ya." Grateful for his remarks, Sky nodded her head even as she wondered at the change in him. Not a talkative man, Dylan mostly communicated with a series of looks, nods, and grunts. When he did talk, he fairly growled his words as though he resented being forced to use them. Occasionally though, his voice became almost gentle in nature. He'd been that way with Jessie and now with her. When that happened, when the kind nature that resided inside cracked through his rough exterior, it was something a person remembered, something they treasured. She sniffed and gave him a small smile. "Thank you." Dylan grinned and patted her arm 3 times. Jessie had done it, and Dylan figured rightly that Sky had taught him to do that when people needed comfort. To show her appreciation, Sky wrapped her arms around him again and hugged him hard. It almost took Dylan's breath away, and surprised, he stiffened a bit. But after a moment, he relaxed and slowly gathered her back into his arms, relaxing against her and returning her embrace. A small, unseen smile tugging at the corner of his mouth.